to talk a little bit about the love of God, and then looking at, of course, the definition of what love actually is. Because especially in this day and age, it's really important actually to understand what love is. There are different words for love and that are used in Scripture, and of course in the original language, the Greek. There's different types of words for love. So we want to look at these different types of words and their actual meaning. The first one we want to look at is agape. Agape is a word that really is focusing on a type of love that seeks the best for the one loved, but can also be used in a way where you're seeking the best for yourself. So you are willing to sacrifice for something else, for your own benefit, or, of course, God's quality of love is agape when it's seeking the best for another person or willing to sacrifice for another person. So when love is seeking the best for the individual, we see over in Luke chapter 11, verse 43, an example of this. Woe, you Pharisees, for you love the best seats in the synagogues and greetings in the marketplace. Now that love there is a willingness to sacrifice for the best seats, for these greetings, for people to know their name and to greet them and how they greet them, the titles that they have in their names, other things like that. That's what they were actually doing here. Love is expressed in the Mosaic Law. In Matthew chapter 5, verses 43, it says, you have heard that it was said, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy, or be indifferent to your enemy is really what it's actually saying there. But this is an agape type of love. Now, under the Mosaic Law, the standard was you love your neighbor as yourself. That is actually the standard. Now, it's a different standard for us as Christians. As Christians, we are to love each other, that is, other Christians, as Christ has loved us. So there's a different quality of this type of love here. So God's quality of love always seeks the best for the one loved. So this would be agape, and when it's used of God, it's expressing a type of love that seeks the best for the one loved. John chapter 15, verse 13 talks about this. Greater love has no one than this, than to lay down one's life for his friends. Now, this laying down your life is actually not restricted to actually physically dying. It's dedicating your life to them, being willing to set apart what you want for the benefit of another person. That's what he's actually talking about here. Another word that is used for love is philos. Now, philos is a friendly type of love. Oftentimes you could use it of being a friend. An example here is with Abraham was called the friend of God, James chapter 2 and verse 23. And the scripture was fulfilled, which said, Abraham believed God, and it was accounted to him for righteousness, and he was called the friend of God. And that would be your philos term there. The world system is fond of its own and indifferent towards Christians. So it has a philos type of love, a fondness type of love towards its own, but could really care less about Christians. John chapter 15, verse 19. If you were of the world would love, that is philos. So it would be fond of, would be actually a better translation. So be fond of its own, yet because you are not of the world, but I have chosen you out of the world, therefore the world hates. It hates you. Well, remember that word hate here is talking about indifferent. Important actually to understand the distinction here, because indifference means you have no problem buddying up to somebody for a benefit that you will get from them. But as soon as you don't get a benefit anymore, you have no problem with throwing them aside. You don't care whether they're successful or not. That's the world system for you in relation to Christians. It's not that it's going out and literally hating this vehement hatred towards us. Now, there are times where it's absolutely expressed in that way, but it comes down to the fact the world system doesn't care about us. It's not fond of Christians. But that doesn't mean it won't take advantage of you. We can also have a fondness of way of life, being fond of the way we actually live life. Revelation chapter 22 and verse 15 talks about this. But outside are dogs and sorcerers and fornicators and murderers and idolaters and whoever loves and practices a lie. Well, your word love there is your word for fond of. So whoever is fond of a lie. Well, of course, in the context here, these would very clearly be religious lies, following idols and other things along those lines, because dogs are those who go back to their sins. Sorcerers are really, sorcery has to do with religious, superstitious awe. Well, I know today they want to, do all kinds of so-called, well, they have magic and other stuff like that. They'll call it, or curses and stuff. It's all superstition. That's all it is. And it's all religiously related, if you really understand it. Murderers are just senseless slaughter. And of course, idolatry is covetousness. They love this type of lifestyle. Fond of is really what it's talking about. They're fond of it. There's a couple of variations of the word philos also in Scripture. So here we have this is philatus, which would be to love oneself or be fond of oneself. 2 Timothy chapter 3 and verse 2 talks about this. For men will be lovers of themselves. Now, this lover of themselves is actually saying they'll be fond of themselves. Lovers of money. Actually, this is the other word, by the way. There's also another one here, which with this would be literally one who is fond of money. Argos. Argos would be your money. So somebody who's very fond of it. We also have, like I said, the love for money over in Luke chapter 16 and verse 14, where here we have now the Pharisees who were lovers of money. Well, your word lovers there is actually one who is fond of money. So they were very fond of money. Also heard all these things and they derided him. Now, there are words for love that are not actually found in Scripture. There's a couple, and this goes back to the original language, to the Greek language in which Scripture was written. And there are a couple of words that relate to different types of love that were never actually used in Scripture, of course, for good reason. They didn't have any need to be used in Scripture. Storge is one which has to do with a family type of love. So this is actually a love that's between family members, which, if you have family members, you know that that's not necessarily agape and not necessarily philos. And what I mean by that is you're not necessarily willing to sacrifice for them, and you're not necessarily fond of them, but they are family. So you kind of get, there is a distinction there. It is not brotherly love, which is fondness. That's not what it's talking about here. So it's different from that type of love. And then you have eros, and eros is romantic, where our word erotic comes from. It's that type of a expression, a type of love that really should only be between a husband and a wife. That's where it actually belongs properly. Depraved sexual feelings misuse this type of love. And then they'll, of course, call it love, but it's really actually not love because they're taking this type of love and they're abusing it. Now, we also have a concept, and it's really important to understand when you're focusing on love, that we have love when actually love is not love. That is, what you're expressing, you're saying is love, but in all actuality, it is not love at all. What about adultery? If you really think about adultery, you're taking another man's wife or husband, either way. That is not love. It's not love for the man. It's not love for the woman, because you're not doing what is best for them. It certainly wouldn't relate to a fondness for either one of them either. It actually would be in relation to the word back here, which has to do with eros, which is erotic type of love that's misused. It's abused. It's twisted. Galatians chapter 5 and verse 19 talks about this. Now, the works of the flesh are evident, which are adultery. We also have fornication. Now, fornication is sex outside of marriage. If you are having sex outside of marriage, neither one of you is actually expressing love towards the other person. Really, what you're doing is seeking fleshly satisfaction from the other person. That is not the same as love. Galatians chapter 5 and verse 19 also goes on to include fornication. Now, the works of the flesh are evident, which are adultery and fornication. Then we have this dishonorable passions that's expressed in Scripture. And oftentimes, like I said, this is portrayed as love, but really it's actually passion within a person that is very dishonorable. And they are among others. They're towards other people. Romans chapter 1, verses 26 through 27 talks about this. Because of this, God handed them over into a dishonorable passions, for both the female among them exchanged the natural use unto that which is against nature. Likewise, both also the male sent away the natural use of the female, caused to be kindled in their longing unto others of the same kind. Males among males, working out for themselves the disgraceful, and receive the recompense that is necessary concerning their wanderings among themselves. Now, you'll notice there's no love in there, but it is definitely talking about sexual things, but it's a complete perversion of what is proper. We also have those who go after strange flesh over in Jude chapter 7. As Sodom and Gomorrah and the cities around them in a similar manner to these, having given themselves over to, well, sexual immorality would be fornication, and have gone after strange flesh. That is a flesh that is different from your flesh. That is a perversion that comes from the sin nature that has nothing to do with love. Now, this, of course, is taking to the extreme, and people back then, people today will take animals and other species and cling to them in a way that they claim is love, but it's really actually not love. It's a perversion that they're doing. So how we define love is actually very important, because we're going to be looking at the love of God. So how we actually define love is extremely important. We can have a type of love that seeks the best for others or for ourselves. That would be an agape type of love. Is fond of others, ourselves, or things. That would be your fondness type of love. Relates to family, or is sexual in nature. Now, this is in an appropriate way. That would be between husband and wife. However, the concept of love can often be mixed up with feelings that seek fleshly gratification. Rather than concern for others, because that's really not what you're after your own fulfillment, especially eros is one of them. The type of erotic love, that is especially one that's perverted in this way. This is actually not love. Rather, these feelings come from depraved and dishonoring passions, and that's what they do among themselves, is highly dishonorable things as a result of these desires. Within Scripture, the type of love we find are either friendship or sacrificial. So these are the only two types of love we actually find in Scripture. It is important to understand the difference between these and how they are actually applied. And there's a few passages in Scripture, by the way, that we're going to look at as we go through this little short series that are the translations in the Bible don't do a really good job of distinguishing between love and fondness. You know, one of the areas that really comes up to my mind is with Peter, where Jesus asked him, "Do you love me?" And you know, I remember reading something from an unbeliever talking about, well, why did Jesus ask him if you love him 3 times? He wasn't asking him the same thing each of those times, because he was using either agape or philos. There was when you actually understand what he was doing, he's driving a point home with Peter. But we'll look at that a little bit later. Friendship has a warmness to it, where a sacrificial love can feel cold, yet it always has the best interest for the one loved in mind. Okay, Agape, love towards other saints, means you're not going to tolerate sin in another person's life that's impacting everybody else. You're going to call them out for it. And they're not going to like that, but you really are seeking the best for them. Where fondness is a little bit warmer. An improper use of both of these types of love lead us into trouble. Fondness with the world is enmity with God. Oh, well, let's go out and feed the poor and let's help all these other people. But then our focus becomes really on a fondness for the world. And by doing that, we're actually putting ourselves in enmity with God. And those who seek what is best for their own use these types of love for their own benefit, not for others. Because agape, God's quality of love, seeks the best for the one loved. But that can be twisted and used in a way where you're seeking the best for you. That is, you are willing to sacrifice for something you want. God's quality of love always seeks the best for the one loved. We know his love because he first loved us. Now, therefore, because of that, to understand true love, we must look at how God actually defines love. Not how we want to define it, but how Scripture actually defines love.